right, 25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. When I was in the 8th grade, Robin, I had a teacher, a social studies teacher named Mr. Lawrence.
Okay.
And I wasn't a great social studies student. However, I thought Mr. Lawrence was a great teacher. And he was an actor also, so he kind of made the experience from the student perspective kind of fun. So he told us this story about, and I grew up on Long Island outside of New York City, and he told us this story of how somewhere in the city there was a tavern where George Washington had his retirement party. Mm-hmm. And so when I fast forward now to last year when I went to New York with my son, I said to my son, you know, I had a teacher who told me that George Washington had his retirement party somewhere here in the city. So my son took out his phone, ding, 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 ding. He found the place. It's in Lower Manhattan. It's called the Fraunces Tavern. Mm-hmm. And then, as you know, this past Thanksgiving, you and I went, and we had Thanksgiving in the same place where George Washington and his buds had a retirement party.
It was amazing.
And I don't know that we ate the same food that George Washington ate.
Turkey.
We had turkey. They probably had turkey, right? And cranberries?
Yeah.
They probably had something like that.
We had some kind of meat.
Anyway, so that's why this next book is so amazing to me. It is called Stirring the Pot with Benjamin Franklin, a founding father's culinary adventures. And Benjamin Franklin was a thinking man. I mean, he really was. And a lot of the thoughts that he had about how to make life better and people healthier manifest themselves in food. Which I never knew until looking at this book. The author of the book is on the phone. Her name is Katherine Eighmey. I hope I'm saying her name right. She is a food historian. She's a cook, and she has won blue ribbons in the Minnesota and Iowa State Fair food competitions. Oh, I love fair food, Robin.
Yes, it's so good.
Good morning, Katherine, and I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, Eighmey. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning. You got it absolutely right.
Excellent. Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from North Iowa, where the weather is very different from what you have in Florida.
Yeah, it is. Do you want me to rub it in? It's very nice here. It's beautiful.
Oh, that's all right. It'll be nice here in a couple months.
So how did you become interested in Benjamin Franklin's culinary work?
Well, I had done a previous book on Abraham Lincoln in the kitchen, and I was looking for someone to follow up on it, and I picked up Franklin's autobiography and noticed that he talked about food 14 times in the first chapters, and I thought, well, this is meant to be.
Well, he was kind of a heavy guy, wasn't he?
Well, in his adult years, he was heavy, but as a youth, he was very athletic. He was a swimmer, which was something that people didn't do much in the 1700s. And he was really strong. He was so strong that he could carry 2 cases of type pages that were set up. He was a printer, you know, and he could carry them between floors. So he was extraordinary. And to show off, he would put all of the paper that he would need to run his own printing shop in a wheelbarrow and push it through the Philadelphia streets so that people would realize he was a hardworking guy.
Oh, wow. So if somebody were to take a recipe from the book, let's say the cheesecake recipe, would the end product taste the same as cheesecake we're used to today, or would it taste differently?
It would taste similar, but different. With the cheesecake, for example, the texture is much lighter than the typical either New York or Philadelphia cheesecakes that we get now. I'm glad you picked that recipe. It's a great one. There's a lemon ice cream, which is made without the benefit of a mechanical churn because they didn't get invented until 100 years after Franklin. And so the staff in the French kitchen, where I pulled that recipe from when Franklin was serving as the American envoy to France during the American Revolution, that recipe is kind of a mixture of a light lemon crystalline with a cream surround. It's just absolutely fabulous. And the other thing, you had mentioned turkey and cranberries. Turkey certainly is turkey, and not that much different from what we eat now, although if you can ever get a hold of a heritage-raised bird, they're really much more flavorful than the butterball ones that we get, although those are good. Those are good.
Nice.
But the cranberry sauce has different seasonings in it. It has mace in it, which is like nutmeg, and that's a really great recipe too.
Wow.
I like the fact that you pointed out that their traditional breakfast back then was beer and bread. I love that. That was great.
Well, not for Franklin, though. That was something that when he went to London, and he was working at a printing firm there, the printers with whom he was working about his age would have breakfast beer, breakfast midday snack, breakfast beer for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to them, if you eat hot cereal the way I do, you're getting the benefit of the grain, which will make you strong and able to do the work better. And besides, it'll be cheaper. So ever frugal Franklin encouraged his co-workers to go into a scheme where he arranged for a woman in the neighborhood to make this hot cereal, and then so they were able to eat more healthily.
Oh, wow.
Save money.
So did he invent oatmeal? I mean, he looks like the Quaker Oats guy a little bit.
He does kind of look like the Quaker Oat guy. I don't know that he invented oatmeal. With cereals like that were certainly common for a long time.
So the recipes in the book, you actually found these recipes somewhere?
I did. I went to a number of sources. All of the recipes, there are 62 of them, and all of them have been adapted to be made in modern kitchens. So, you're not having to go out and dig an open hearth or something. But I looked first to his papers, and he didn't say much in terms of recipes, although there were a couple that he published in Poor Richard's Almanac, and there's a great noodle from Poor Richard's that I put in the book, and it's essentially flour and water and salt, and it's really good. I then looked at cookbooks that he would have had access to, and we know that in his print shop he also had a bookstore, and we know that one of the books that he sold was Eliza Smith's Complete Housewife, which they imported from England. So I pulled recipes from there because we know that would have been in his environment. When he was in France, we have the benefit of looking at the complete list of everything that the kitchen bought in 1783, which was the year he was negotiating the Treaty of Paris to bring the Revolutionary War to an end. So we can see everything that the kitchen bought, and there were like 9,000 pounds of beef, 2,330 apples, and we see that he ate, pretty much from farm to fork, and seasonally, and ate an awful lot of fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. So I was able to find sources of French cookbooks from that era and from that station,
Oh, wow.
and pulled recipes from them as well.
I like the fact that stirring the pot has a double meaning.
Well, yes, it does. He sort of stirred the pot in everything that he did. I was able to talk about his youth, where he worked for his brother as an apprentice in the printing shop, and he was supposed to work until he was 21, but he got antsy, thought he knew the business as well as his brother, and ran away from home to New York and then to Philadelphia. And then certainly you look at his colonial activities, trying to bring about an early alliance of the colonies in 1754, and then, of course, the Revolution.
So tell me about the kitchen utensils that might have been different then than now. Did he have an oven the way we know an oven today? Well, obviously it wouldn't be an electric oven, right? But I mean, what did he have?
Well, he did experiment with electricity, but you're right, we didn't have electric ovens. Typically, the houses had open hearths, the kind you see when you go to Colonial Williamsburg and in pictures, and his mother certainly had a wide range of kitchen utensils that were designed specifically to work efficiently in those open hearths. So they really are not as difficult to work with as we might think about once you start thinking how they really, really function. But when he was in England and he and his wife were building this huge mansion home in Philadelphia, it was going to be 30 by 30 and 3 stories tall. So that's pretty big. He sent her an oven which he had seen that was being used there, and it was really functions like our modern ovens in that the heat comes from the bottom. The way our gas does, only then it would have been, or electricity.
Uh-huh.
Back then it would have been fire, wood. so it was much more easy to control for baking purposes. But he also had a pot which he bought in Sheffield, England, that was silver and copper, and just the right size to cook a chicken. And he could cook that chicken himself on top of his room heating stove.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really?
And he loved that pot so much, he got it sort of smuggled to France from England during the Revolution.
Smuggled.
Oh, my gosh.
Did the food preparation differ from today? For example, today you go buy a bag of flour. Back then, did you have to actually literally grind it yourself?
No. Where Franklin lived, in cosmopolitan areas, you could go buy flour, you could go buy cornmeal. You didn't have to grind it all yourself.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And they lived in Philadelphia. They lived right on Market Street. So 3 times a week, all the farmers would come with their, like a farmer's market here, with their fruits, vegetables, meats. And, Deborah, his wife, could just walk out the front door and down a block, and she had her choice of whatever she wanted.
Wow, I never knew his wife's name, Deborah.
No.
Deborah Franklin.
So she didn't really travel with him when he went abroad. She was responsible for sending him things that he wanted, like the cranberries?
Absolutely right. Yes, she stayed home, and there's some people say, well, she was afraid to cross the ocean, and I think there is something to that. When she came over as a young girl with her parents, the stories are that it was a very, very rough crossing. 12 weeks on a heaving boat is not the best way to enamor yourself of ocean travel.
Right.
But she also was responsible for running their businesses while he was away, and also taking care of his various relations. He had a number of siblings, and he helped take care of them. So she kind of ran the family business as well. But the one thing that he wanted, he was very happy in London. He was meeting with scientists. He did famous experiments in electricity, and he was well known in England before he got there as a Pennsylvania colonial agent. But the one thing he said in letters, that he really wanted the taste of home. So she sent him smoked meats. She sent him, smoked venison, smoked ham, pickled sturgeon, which is this really huge fish that's firmly fleshed, apples, apple trees, and cranberries, which were quite bewildering to his landlady's kitchen staff.
Wow.
You had pointed out that in his early years he was a vegetarian, and that people, when they were cooking, they didn't want to cook that way. They wanted to add the meat and everything.
Right. Well, it typically was a protein stew, spit-cooked meat culture. And so Ben had read this book. This is when he was 16 and working for his brother and, being sort of, full of himself a little bit, I think. But he read this book and decided that he would make the moral choice to eat a vegetarian lifestyle. And his brother James said, well, fine, as you suggested, Robin, we're not going to ask the cook to make these special meals for you. So how about this? I will give you half the money that I would give to her to cook your meal, and you can go buy what you want. Well, clever Ben saw this as a win-win-win. Not only would he be able to eat the lifestyle that he wanted to eat, he then could take the half of the money that he didn't spend on his own food. He could then spend buying books, which were just as important to him as food. And he then had the hour while the rest of the workers were off eating. He had that hour to himself for study. So, he was really happy.
Oh, my gosh.
Wow. And I'm guessing that cooking in those days could take hours. Am I right? Like now you go to the microwave, in 2 minutes seems like it takes forever. But I'm guessing the food sat in the heat for a while.
You're absolutely right, Larry. There are a lot of recipes back then where you would put your soup or your stew, or even a bag of boiled pudding, which is a savory thing, not a sweet thing, in a pot and just put it to the back of the hearth where it could be over a low bed of coals and literally cook all day. Like our slow cookers work.
Right.
You had brought up the term Seamens Biscuits.
Yes, yeah. That's kind of one of my favorite recipes in the book, too. And it again kind of illustrates the surprise to me was how different, and it was a surprise to Ben, too, how different the colonial foodways were. Nowadays we don't think much difference between Boston, where he was raised as a child, and Philadelphia, where he ran off to. But in Boston, they commonly ate what were Seamens Biscuits, and in doing the research, they're kind of like a biscotti,
Pass
you
on
know,
that
thin and crispy, the kind of thing that would keep in a barrel on board a ship. Or if you were a kid running around, you know, fishing in the pond, you could have some in your pocket. So when he got to Philadelphia, he went to get some biscuits like that. And Philadelphia was not as large a seafaring town. It was not as dependent on seafaring ways as Boston. So he went to the bakery in Philadelphia and said, well, you know, I want one of these. And the bakery kind of said, you know, the baker said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. So he went through, you know, well, do you have this? Do you have this? And no. So he finally said, well, you know, just give me, you know, a couple pennies worth of bread. Well, he ended up with 3 long loaves of bread, long enough that he could tuck them under his arm. So there he was walking the streets of Philadelphia, you know, in kind of clothes that he'd been wearing for a week and a half.
Oh my gosh!
Because he'd been traveling, and his trunks were coming. You know, so he only had essentially what he could wear and what he could stuff in his big pockets with these 3 loaves of bread.
Suitcases.
Oh, okay.
They called them trunks back then.
Pants. Okay. All right. Okay. So he's on the $100 bill now. We could buy so much food for $100. Back.
This is true. We could.
I like the fact that, you know, because we always have this thing about people eating in France. They eat like all the time, and they're much thinner than the Americans are. But then you bring out in the book how in France they use sauces, but they were very light sauces, where in America we use sauces, but everything's really heavy and caloric.
It's interesting to observe those that ebb and flow through the years. You're absolutely right, Robin.
This is a fascinating conversation. Art, the book that we're talking about is called Stirring the Pot with Benjamin Franklin, A Founding Father's Culinary Adventures. It has recipes in the book and lots of fun and interesting stories. This is actually published by the Smithsonian. Katherine Eighmey is on the phone. She's the author of this and did all the research behind it. And you've got a big background of writing about food and like you mentioned earlier, the Abraham Lincoln food book. So this is your whole world. Do you feel that you would ever put the recipes as a regular thing? Like, is there anything from Benjamin Franklin that you put into your normal, like, okay, here, like the family's coming over, I'm going to make something from Ben?
Oh, yeah, all the time. These foods, both from Lincoln's era and Franklin's era, are so good that I do make them, you know, all the time. The noodle that I told you about, which is a real simple noodle to make, I do that all the time. I do the lemon ice cream all the time. At Thanksgiving, I had the cranberry sauce from Franklin's era, and then made the turkey hash with the leftovers. So
really?
That's just, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you know, I have a question for you, because you are a culinary person, and this is really not necessarily because of the book. When I go to a restaurant and it says spaghetti made on the premises, okay, or pasta made on the premises. Like if I go to the grocery store and I buy pasta, it has to be boiled. It's very hard and brittle. But if they make it, do they actually have to dry it, or do they just put it in the boiling water and it never really gets hard and brittle?
Well, fresh-made pasta usually is not hard and brittle. Most restaurants that I'm familiar with that make their own pasta, and as I said, that noodle that I talked about, you don't dry that. You know, you just some pastas need to dry for a half hour or so. Some you can just toss right in the pot.
Really?
If you're dealing with fresh pasta, and I bet in a city as sophisticated as Ocala, you could find fresh pasta in your grocery store.
Benjamin Franklin was a visionary as well, because like you said earlier, his wife was in America running the businesses. After she died, did he come back to continue the running of the businesses, or did they close?
That's a really good question. He was very clever, and he worked. One of the Poor Richard aphorisms is "Mind your business, and your business will mind you." And so he worked really, really hard as a printer in partnership with Deborah. And after 18 years, at that point he was 40-some, he was able to retire from actively running the business. And that's when he began his scientific and civic life. He also franchised printers so that the man he sold his business to, who Deborah kind of kept an eye on while Ben was overseas, was to pay him, a percentage of the business for 10 years. And there were others that he set up as well that paid him over a period of years. So he was very clever that way. And then she died in 1775, and he came back immediately after she died. And at that point, the businesses were pretty much running themselves, and he had kind of stepped away from that into full diplomacy. And he was there as he arrived shortly after the first gunfire at Lexington and Concord, and was around to help write the Declaration of Independence with Thomas Jefferson and sign it. And then they said, well, we're going to need help because we can't afford, in the first place, you couldn't make gunpowder in the United States. You were forbidden from doing that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So how are you going to wage a war if you can't have gunpowder, you can't buy it, and you can't have the ingredients to make it? Well, you need somebody to help you. So who can we get to help us? The other colonists thought, well, France, who had been a generations-long enemy of England, was the logical place to go for help. So they sent Franklin to France in the fall of 1776. So he was home for about a year and a half and then went back overseas. And while he was over there, he was immediately recognized and welcomed because his electrical experiments had been written up and published in books and translated into French. So everyone knew him as, this scientific genius, and so they welcomed him, and he was able to work with the government and the king and get support for the American church.
Wow, fascinating stuff. I have a copy of Stirring the Pot with Benjamin Franklin. I'd like to give it away. The rest of us have to go buy it. I did find it on Amazon, and so I was wondering before we take a phone call, did you have a website you wanted to promote?
Well, if people go to www.benjaminfranklinentertains.com.
Oh, okay.
There are some sample recipes there. There's some more about Ben's life, and there's a link to Amazon. But I do know the book is available in some bookstores as well.
And it is published by Smithsonian Books, correct?
Yes, Smithsonian Books. Yes.
Yeah. So were Benjamin Franklin and George Washington friends? And is it possible that Ben Franklin was at that retirement party that I went to the restaurant in New York?
I don't think he was at the retirement party, but Ben and George were indeed friends. They had several occasions where they met, and in 1783, when Franklin was back home in Philadelphia, 1787, when Franklin was back home in Philadelphia and they were writing the Constitution, Franklin was sort of the local host for that Constitutional Convention, and in Washington's diary, he talks about going to Franklin's home on a couple of occasions.
Wow.
And didn't Franklin invent that bottle capping, that corker machine?
I wanted to tell you about that. When we went to this restaurant in New York where George Washington retired, in the men's room, there was a device, and I thought it looks like a torture device. So Robin couldn't go in there, so I took a picture of it to show her, and Robin's son went in there and looked at it, and he didn't know. Nobody knew what it was. Well, anyway, the waitress looked at it, and she said, "Oh, that's a bottle corking machine." Mm-hmm. Yeah, so somebody invented that machine to cork bottles, like wine bottles with, I guess.
Right.
Probably Ben Franklin.
So isn't that interesting? All right, let me
I don't know if Franklin invented that. He devised a goodly number of things, but...
Goodly. I like that word, goodly. Okay. Let me give away the book real quickly. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Edwina.
Edwina, you've got the book. It'll be waiting for you here.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. and the rest of us will have to go buy it. It's really a wonderful book. Gosh, yeah, we meet so many interesting people by doing this radio show, and we've never spoken to anybody who gave us recipes from Benjamin Franklin.
No, this is great.
Well, I hope you all enjoy them.
I think we will. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us today, and stay warm. Would you say you were in Iowa?
Iowa.
Iowa.
That's
Okay.
right.
All right. Yeah. Stay warm up there. It'll get warm. We'll send you some warm weather real soon.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. We will be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. A Russia election meddling investigation may be moving all the way up the chain soon.
News report.